Now, our next item of business today is consideration of Business Motion 22125 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out revisions to this week's business. Could I call on Graham Day to move this motion?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Minister. No member has indicated they wish to speak. Therefore, the question is that motion 22125 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Thank you. We're going to turn now to topical questions. Our first question is from David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what steps it is taking to reduce the transmission of COVID-19 as the NHS services resume.
Cabinet Secretary Jean Freeman.
As we remobilise our NHS, the Chief Nursing Officer's expert group on nosocomial transmission has made three important sets of recommendations. Firstly, in addition to the testing of all staff connected to a suspected nosocomial outbreak, we will now test on a weekly basis staff working in specialist cancer units, in long-term care of the elderly and in long-stay mental health wards. Boards will be asked to start this additional testing from the 8th of July. Secondly, that face masks will now be worn in hospitals and care homes for adults by staff who have contact with patients or residents. That's all staff who have contact with patients or residents. And that in outpatients, day case attendances and visitors will be asked to wear a face covering. This new measure is designed to reduce the risk of transmission from the person wearing the mask or the face covering. Guidance on this for health boards and employers will issue this week and be effective from the 29th of June. And thirdly, enhanced cleaning and maintenance regimes in areas of high patient volume and areas where there are surfaces that are frequently touched will be implemented again from this week, but across our health boards from the 29th of June.
David Torrance.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. In the interest of both safety of patients and staff, understandably, not all health services can be resumed at this stage. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline what is the best way for members of the public to access reliable health information?
Cabinet Secretary.
So we have published in our Scottish Government website a list of both the framework for decision making for restarting, remobilising, recovery and redesign of our health service. That gives an indication of the phases of that exercise, and the first meeting of the recovery group, which I will chair, will take place this coming Monday. In addition, there is information there across all our health boards about all the initial phase 1, i.e. to the end of July, services that are being restarted or increased in their work until the end of July, and boards will be commissioned to produce additional remobilisation plans that will go from the beginning of August right through to the end of March next year. The recovery group will look at that, and as those board plans are agreed, those too will be published.
David Torrance.
Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm that the face coverings that visitors to health and care settings will be expected to wear are simply coverings and not medical-grade masks?
Mr Torrance is absolutely right. So staff will be wearing medical-grade masks, of course, both in health and in social care. But for those outpatients attending for day case procedures and for visitors, it will be face coverings along the lines as has been recommended most recently for transport and for those entering other areas where physical distancing is difficult.
And Alison Johnson.
Thank you. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for a response to Mr Torrance. Can I ask at what point the Scottish Government intend to widen testing to all staff working in our NHS facilities, such as hospitals, as we know that those carrying COVID-19 can be asymptomatic while contagious? Thank you.
Cabinet Secretary.
Yeah, I'm grateful to Ms Johnson for that additional question. The nosocomial group, chaired by the Chief Nursing Officer, is a group of experts, including Professor Tom Evans, who is part of our CMO advisory group, and others in antimicrobial resistance and infection prevention and control. And at this point, their recommendation is not to widen testing to other areas of our NHS, but to introduce it in those areas that I have described, where they believe the risk of nosocomial infection is higher, or where there are particularly vulnerable group of cohort of patients, so for example specialist cancer units, but to continuously review that. And so it may be in time that advice from them will change to widen it to other cohorts of our NHS staff, but at this point their expert and clinical advice is to focus it in the way that I've described.
And Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary say what measures will be used to screen patients for COVID-19 prior to and on admission?
Cabinet Secretary.
So it would be the PCR test, and so boards are working up how far in advance of an admission date for elective surgery, for example, that they will ask people to self-isolate for a period, and then working out the detail of how the test will get to the individual at what point in advance of their planned elective procedure. And once they have agreed that as a national position across our health service, then I will make sure that the member knows, but also other party spokespeople and, of course, the committee.
Thank you. Question number 2, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the number of people tracked through its test and trace system and the availability of its digital tool to the public.
Cabinet Secretary.
So Test and Protect was successfully rolled out across health boards in Scotland on the 28th of May this year. Between the 28th of May and the 14th of June, the date for which the latest data was published, 992 cases were recorded, from which 1,239 contacts have been traced. Data is published on Public Health Scotland's website and is updated every Wednesday, so the data to the 21st of June will be published tomorrow. In terms of the digital tool, we're on track to provide an initial public-facing digital tool by the end of June, as we had intended. We will then at that point take a decision on how quickly we roll that out across the system, taking into account how our Test and Protect service has developed, international evidence that may be available, and the volume of cases being experienced.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The Sunday Post reported that between the start of Test and Protect on May 28th and the 14th of June, Scottish Government tracers identified an average of 1.2 contacts for each COVID-positive test result, whereas in England, tracers were identifying 8.5 contacts for every positive test over the same period. So can I ask, why is this gap so striking? And if this does not include special outbreak tracing in health and social care settings, then why not?
Cabinet Secretary.
So it's a very good question from Mr Cole-Hamilton. I'm grateful to him for it. There are two main reasons for the difference. The first is, to a degree, the fact that the easing of lockdown measures in some respects have happened in England a little ahead of here in Scotland, and so you would expect that as people are less locked down, I can't think of another way of describing it, Presiding Officer, then there are more contacts that they would be in contact with. But the other reason is, as Mr Cole-Hamilton has indicated, it is about how between Scotland and England we deal with complex cases. In England, all cases are handled by their centralised National Contact Tracing Centre. In Scotland, complex cases are handled by expert local health protection teams. And so the data from those cases are gathered and reported separately from the data for Test and Protect. However, we are now looking at how we can bring that data together so that the Test and Protect data that is published includes data from those complex cases. And that would give a more comparable position between Scotland and England. In terms of what is defined as a complex case, it's a complex or high-risk setting where the expertise of the local health protection team is needed. In particular, that could be in an educational establishment, in a homeless hostel or shelter, or in a prison setting, for example. So we will continue to deal with it in that separate way, but we will now work to bring the data together so that it can be migrated into a single system.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I'm very grateful for that answer. If the Cabinet Secretary is confident that the tracing process is rigorous, but still turning up just one contact for each new case, is she equally confident that the current definition of a contact is catching everybody it needs to? We know how important Test and Protect is to beating the virus, because we know how infectious the virus is. We also know the multitude of ways it can be passed on, including via hard surfaces. So has there been an update to the science suggesting that 15 minutes at 2 meters is the right threshold for contact tracing? And can I also ask, if a patient identifies that they have visited a public space before testing positive, what deep cleaning protocols are then followed?
Cabinet Secretary.
So there has been no update to the science at this point that would change what is the definition of a contact. But of course, both the CMO's expert advisory group and our advisors elsewhere, not least in Health Protection Scotland, continually monitor whether or not there should be an update at any point. So I am at this stage, based on their expert advice, confident that the situation is proceeding, and Test and Protect is a system that is operating well across the whole of Scotland. And I think the concern that may exist between the number of contacts reported in England and in Scotland, I think, is explicable, as I have already set out. And as we see the data merge, then you will get a proper comparison between what is happening between Scotland and England. My apologies in terms of, what I should have said is that it is important for me to be clear that although we deal with complex cases in a different way, contacts are traced through those complex cases. So the number of contacts is followed through both in complex cases and those through the Test and Protect programme.
Thank you very much. Miles Briggs, be followed by Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As of last night, over 452,000 tests that had been made available through both the combined UK and Scottish Government facilities had not been utilised. The Cabinet Secretary had made a pledge to test every member of staff in care homes across Scotland. So can I ask, if this is now the case, if all care home staff who are working in care homes where there have been no COVID-19 cases are now being routinely tested?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, it is the case. It should be clear when we publish the data tomorrow. As Mr Briggs knows, I issued what could only be described as an instruction to all our health boards that the national policy was not open to local interpretation, and therefore we now receive weekly their plans for that testing. The care home portal, which is how a lot of the testing, the bulk of the testing, is accessed, has now increased the numbers available to us, which is of a significant help. And my understanding, the last figure that I had, it may have increased since then, that 700 of our 1,083 care homes had registered for that portal, so would be receiving those test kits and therefore then returning those as appropriate. So the testing of care home workers, not only in care homes where there is no active case, but care home workers across the care home sector is well underway, and we will see the figures that are published tomorrow in that regard.
Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The UK Government failed to include devolved administrations in consideration of the tracing app that was being developed and since abandoned. Now that the UK Government have stated they will switch to an app-based system using the Google and Apple API, can the Cabinet Secretary tell us if devolved administrations have been given an opportunity this time to be meaningfully involved in the development of the replacement app?
Cabinet Secretary.
So my understanding is that my officials in this area have had some initial information, but I would not myself describe that as active involvement. I have had no information yet from my counterpart, Mr Hancock. I am sure that that will be coming. It isn't clear to me exactly where that is in terms of Google and Apple with the Secretary of State and NHS England, but in my weekly four-nation call, then we will be raising that and discussing that with them again this week and see where that is and whether or not there is going to be from NHS England a proximity app. Meanwhile, our Test and Protect programme is not reliant at all on a proximity app, never has been, and I'm pleased that we took that decision, given what has happened with the proximity app south of the border, but we will always look at the option of a proximity app as an enhancement to our Test and Protect programme.
Thank you very much. And that concludes topical questions. Oh. Point of order, Mr Findlay.
Officer, you may have seen at the weekend reports in the press that US surgeon Dr Veronicas, who was supposed to be coming to Scotland through an arrangement with the Scottish Government to operate on mesh-injured women, is no longer apparently coming. Now we're in the last week before we go into a recess. Can you advise if you've had a request from the Scottish Government to make a statement on this, so that all those women out there whose last hope is him coming here will know exactly what is going on?
Thank you, Mr Findlay. I can confirm we've not had a request neither from the government nor have we had one from any of the party business managers or any individual member. However, I would point out there was a question put in by Mr Findlay himself. There will be opportunities tomorrow at First Minister's questions if Mr Findlay or any other member wishes to ask a question on this subject.